Hi, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to anyone who's connected. Thank you for joining us to this month webinar regarding preventing SQL injection attacks. During this session at the end, we will have a Q&A session, so please feel free to write down your question and ask at the end, or you may contact us freely whenever you feel comfortable over email or over our online chat in our website, GreenSQL.com. So let's start. So without a doubt, number one global security challenge today is information theft. And the thing is that you'll hear a lot about new ways of attack and new mechanisms and new technologies and new way to prevent those attacks, and at the same time that the number of breaches is increasing dramatically. So that's an interesting question. How come with all endless new security technologies, still information theft now is a bigger criminal industry even than drug trading? And when people try to understand and to keep into the right perspective, how come the information theft keeps on growing, I think something really changed regarding the target of the attack. If 10 years ago or even 7 years ago, the target of the attack was about defacement of website, was about getting access to your network for specific attacks, today people started to understand that the database is the main destination of any attack. And that's why we try to understand the threat map. It doesn't matter who are the threat actors and what is the threat vectors. It doesn't matter where from the attack is taking place and who is the source who is initiating this type of an attack. The destination eventually is to get to your information. If in the past, again, it was about specific defacement, and you will hear a lot about cyber attacks, about attacking SCADA systems and attacking different types of systems that are part of a country-based infrastructure. But the big amount of attacks that you'll see today is targeting to get to your information. And it doesn't matter if the cyber attack destination is through people. And when I'm saying through people, it can be through your specific devices, attacking mobile devices from tablets to smartphones, or through system, attacking your servers, your network switches, and sometimes even attacking your printers. People don't take into consideration that printers eventually are computers. They have an IP address, they have a management web server, they have a storing device based on flash, so you can actually run third-party applications on your printer. So attacking system, any type of a system, in order to get to your information. As I mentioned before, as time passes, we see endless amount of new technology in order to secure our information. Those are just a few highlights from the passing year regarding major organizations that have suffered a major information breach and information stealth, and things is not getting any better. When huge organizations like LinkedIn, like Visa and MasterCard that are taking security extremely seriously, are still suffering from information leakage, from information breach. How come people are still don't take into the daily consideration that the final destination is eventually the information stored inside their databases? And this brings us to the threat economy. There is economy behind all those types of attacks. There is the source, there are destination, there is the company, which is most of you and us eventually, and how exactly people get to the final destination, which is eventually your database. There are endless new mechanisms, there are endless new tools, there are endless amount of new ways that people get inside your infrastructure. But the final destination, I know that I'm repeating myself, but this is a really important point that we have to take into consideration, is the part that the final destination eventually is the database. So the database is the company, and I think we can divide, there are two types of connection to the database. There are the automated connection that most of the time we do not control and sometimes we monitor, like any web server that have a connection string. It can be any ETL system, it can be the backup, the replication, the reporting system, and it can be also a user-based connection, which means the DBA, any IT operational team, any part of a high-privileged user that have access to the database. It can be developers, it can be QA teams, it can be a lot of different part of the organization that have the option to get to the database. And when we're trying to map the different type of breach point where from exactly a threat can occur when it comes to our databases that stores the most sensitive information, it can be multiple location. It comes from the internet, it comes from internal resources, it can come from external resources, but eventually the target is the information. Something really interesting been happening the past decade is that hackers have become professional. There's a full business models. As I mentioned before, there's a threat economy. And when there's a business model financing this type of sources to get to your information, that's what happens, that you can actually buy the most sensitive information you can think of online. To your right, you can see a price list that I actually found online, how you can buy any part of this information for any American or Canadian citizen online. And this part of information is available not only for American and Canadian citizens, but actually you can buy it through anyone. And more than 90% of this information that people got was stolen from databases. If in the past people have been targeting just huge organizations like eBay and like major banks to get a lot of information, today it's a mistake. Banks pay the biggest amount of money you can imagine in order to protect the information stored in accessing through their website. But on the other hand, you can see an extremely small businesses that store information of millions of customers that maybe cannot afford, maybe don't have the knowledge, maybe don't have the motivation to truly secure this information. So attackers are now finding the smaller organization, the smaller websites, because it's extremely easy to attack and it's extremely easy to bypass most of the security mechanisms is used by those companies, and by attacking about 10 or 20 different organizations, they can easily get to the destination they're interested. And this is something we should truly take into consideration when we consider protecting this type of information. And in order to do that, we have to understand what's called the attackability surface. This is something that usually a lot of organizations and a lot of people don't take into consideration to understand the attackability surface of a system. It's any system, but what I'm trying to talk now is about the database. And the database is an application. Doesn't matter if I'm using Oracle database or if I'm using MySQL database or if I'm using Microsoft SQL database. The database is an application, and this application runs on an operating system. And in order for me to understand the attackability surface of a specific system, and now we're talking about the database, I have to take into consideration the entire scope of elements that can lead to bypassing the security mechanism of my database. And I mentioned just a minute before Microsoft SQL Server. Microsoft SQL Server, even though it's a really sophisticated application that runs on a Windows Server operating system, when I have to think about the security and the attackability surface of a Microsoft SQL Server, I have to take into consideration each and every part of the entire component that I'm calling a database server. Any part of those attack vectors can lead to a full successful attack to my database. And many times, if an attacker has reached the operating system, I will never even know that someone was able to get the information stored inside my database. None of the added logs as part of the database will map that someone just copied 2 files from the operating systems. And if I have any third-party applications running on my database server, this is additional security threat and additional security severity that I have to take into consideration. Many times we think about the database as a black box, as this is a server that just runs our database application, but this is completely different, and this is something that we have to start taking control of. So this session is about SQL injection, and until today, even in the OWASP, by the way, if you've seen the OWASP report of 2013, the OWASP report that just was published 2 months ago is still making SQL injection the #1 cause to information leak and information stolen from our databases. So before that, we have to understand that SQL injection goes directly to our most valuable assets. If we will talk about Trojan horses or malware that comes from a website, they're attacking the operating system, but SQL injection goes directly to the database. Many times it's using an extremely legit connectivity, which means our web server, we ourselves have configured a connection string to access to the database. Even though the database is not connected directly to the internet, even if we didn't configure a gateway, so a person doesn't have a direct connection, but once the web server is connecting to the database, an attacker will use this type of a source. Any network or operating system security won't help in any way. We can have a firewall up and running. We can have an intrusion prevention system up and running. We can even have an antivirus running on the operating system. It will not help to mitigate SQL injections attacks. Because once you're located inside the database, you only see a legit connection coming from the web server. And once you're running on the network, you only see a regular connection using a standard SQL driver connection that is running legit connection to the database. So many times when you think, no, I've purchased a firewall, the best firewall, even the most advanced firewall like Fortinet or Checkpoint or Palo Alto, it won't help when it comes to SQL injection attacks. You have to think about the application layers, the web application layer, but as well as the database application layer. Many systems, and it doesn't matter if you use a closed source application or an open source application, are vulnerable to SQL injection attacks. And the funny thing is that you can check it by yourself, by the way. Okay, there's several websites that goes and explains and publish all those vulnerability. And if you go to a website called ExploitDB, and exploitdb.com publish each and every new exploit, remote exploitation, local exploitation, and also web applications. And in this specific website of inside exploit-db.com, you can see new SQL injections that are being published almost on a daily basis. Some of them based on a platform of a PHP, sometimes it's based on even a hardware box that you have acquired and installed in your network. So web application, and most of them are SQL injection attacks or some sort of a web application vulnerability or login bypass attempt. You can see that even the biggest name like Adobe Cold Fusion, and you can see even the most common and the most basic open source application are suffering from SQL injection vulnerabilities. And this is something that we have to take into consideration, that not only, it's not a matter just of an open source application that are available somewhere and you can tell to yourself, I'm not using those web applications. Even among the big names, SQL injections can be found and are being found every day. This is an extremely easy to learn and attempt to attack SQL injection. And just to explain how simple it is, if we will find what's called the old school, the old legacy way of attack, in order to run an exploitation, in order to truly understand, people have to understand coding. People have to understand shellcode and payloads and a very sophisticated way. They have to understand how to compile this code and how to truly run this code and to have direct access to the destination they would like to exploit, and this requires advanced knowledge. On the other hand, when we're talking about SQL injection attacks, most of the times, all it takes for someone to have a successful SQL injection attack on the VirtuMart as part of Joomla, for example, it should go up now, all it takes is just running a link. That's it. You have to take this into consideration, the ease that it takes to learn and to run SQL injection attempts most of the time is just running a link. If someone publishing, and just take a look at this specific, if someone finds a VirtuMart component, part of your Joomla CMS, running in your company website or running in your private website, and it discovers that it's running any version lower than 2.2.22a, all it takes for him is just write down your domain instead of the example.com and just add this link, and he have successfully initiated and executed a SQL injection attack. And even if it's not a common application that you found vulnerabilities, there are endless amount of web applications, of applications that will try to run SQL injection attacks for you. It doesn't matter, by the way, which database runs at the backend, because most of those applications, and this specific application is named Havish, but you can find Pangolin and SQL Map and SQL Ninja and endless amount of applications that will run automated SQL injection attempts in order to bypass your security assured, or if you have performed code review on your website, in order to get the information stored inside your database. And once you're inside the database and the SQL injection attacks is running, it's not only about performing SQL injection attacks. So what I'm trying to say is that it's extremely easy to run, and it's extremely easy to study and learn how to run SQL injection attacks. And as I just showed you in exploitdb.com, there's endless amount of information available about this. If you have written your own application, for example, a closed source application that is not available through the web, an attacker will need to get a copy in order to reverse engineer it and to find the exploits possibilities of your application. On the other hand, on SQL injection, you will just run the most common script you can find online in order to find how to bypass the security level as part of your application. So many times people ask, how common is SQL injections? So without a doubt, it's the most common vulnerability today, and you can check it also in OWASP latest report of 2013. The #1 common vulnerability today is still SQL injection. And many times people say, yes, but it's a known vulnerability. It's been discovered over 10 years ago and a lot of new solution. Yes, all is correct. But the thing today that SQL injection have starting to be discovered in the closed source applications as well. And this is a very interesting point, because if you use a closed source application, you can say, I'm using a client server. I don't even have a web server. It's even worse. How come? If it's a web application that your application is published through, so you can also use web application firewalls. You can actually increase the security level by running, there are endless new amount of web application security solutions, like F5 web application firewall, like Imperva, like many others. There is even also a service-based, which means a cloud-based solution to have a web application security. But if you are using a closed source application, you cannot provide additional layer of security. And it all comes down to the security you implement in front of your database. Some pen tests and some pen testers companies claim that more than 65% of their clients turn out to be vulnerable to some sort of SQL injection attacks. And this is a really scary fact, because many times if you will run the most common script, you will not be able to find those SQL injections attacks. But on the other hand, when someone a professional will run a manual and hands-on testing to find the security flaws available in your application, according to pen test companies, over 65% of the clients will turn out to be vulnerable to some sort of SQL injection attacks. So we're talking about SQL. I assume that most of you know, so just a few seconds talking about SQL. SQL is the most common way to run with our relational-based databases, the option to retrieve information, update information, delete information. So if I would like to get information stored on a table-based database, I will run a select command in order to retrieve this information. I can sort it, I can execute it, I can run endless amount, well, it's not really endless, but a major amount of commands in order to retrieve information from the database. So SQL is the language that I'm talking with the relational-based databases. In SQL injection, the trick is, let's say, how can I send a command to a web application? And even though this web application doesn't talk SQL with me as a client, but still to make the web application run commands to what's called the bad SQL and unapproved SQL commands to the database. It can start with the most common and the most simple commands like show databases. Which databases are stored inside your database server? It can go through the option to change different configuration levels. to change password, even to execute commands that will be executed at the operating system layer. And trying to think about the trick, how can I construct SQL statement that will run through the web application and to bypass any input validation or any URL link validation in order to make your database get a command it wasn't supposed to get to see the password, to bypass a command, to bypass the option, to get the part of information. As I mentioned before, not only web applications are vulnerable to SQL injection attacks, but on the other hand, many times people think that some types of databases, older databases like Informix, or even by using Microsoft SQL, Microsoft Access as a database source for your web application, will cause the security level to be increased. But this is wrong. There are endless amount of applications and databases that are vulnerable to SQL injections attacks. And this is something that people have to take into consideration when they're designing their security level or they're designing the required layer that they're interested. SQL injection characters, I'm not going to get into that, but you can get a lot of information how attackers and how the application that I just showed a few minutes earlier are executing the SQL injection commands in order to get to the information. And many times, in order to truly see, I would like even to demonstrate how easy it is. So running a SQL injection attacks on a website is illegal, let's be honest. But on the other hand, if I would like to run a SQL injection, you can find endless amount of web server. I'm sorry about that, just a sec. There are endless amount of web servers available for you to run your attacks on. And this specific web server is knownly vulnerable, but just to show you how easy it is, if I would like to get to the database behind this web server, I don't have to know SQL injection attacks. I don't even have to know how exactly to construct the strings. I can download this free application that's called Havish, and I can just add a dynamic link. Dynamic link means the most easy way to detect this. By the way, not only dynamic links are vulnerable to SQL injections. I will provide a link that includes a question mark. I don't need to know which database runs at the backend. I don't need to know the method. I don't need to know which type. Is it an integer or a string? I don't need to know the keyword. All I have to do is to press analyze. This application will automatically detect the SQL vulnerability, and it will show me the database names used by this application. Just by pressing table and by pressing get databases, it will also retrieve the other databases stored on those database server or instance. By choosing a specific database and pressing get tables, I can see the table structures inside the database at the backend. And you have to understand how simple it is. In order to have this type of an attack running using a specific exploit on a specific database, only from the internal network, it will take us not only hours, but it can take days and weeks and sometimes even months to get this kind of information, to get to the user table and to get the columns inside of the users. To get information inside the username and password, you have to understand how easy it is with today's applications that are available to anyone that can download for free from the internet, to have them up and running within minutes in order to get the information inside your database, even though your database is not even connected to the internet. So this was just the most basic example how serious this problem is. And even though I'm running this application on a website that is already knownly vulnerable to SQL injection, it's allowed to run an attacks on this specific web server, you can also run those types of attacks on any internal services running websites. And from this, it's getting a little bit more dangerous even. Because when I have the option and I'm getting through the input validation and I'm starting the attack, I'm getting to the very sensitive place where it calls OS interaction. And OS interaction means that I can start running commands to the operating system. So besides the fact that I will retrieve all the information I'm interested in the database, but which other servers do I have inside my infrastructure? Do I have a file server? Do I have any type of an ERP application internally that even doesn't connect to the internet? And from OS interaction, I can start expand my influence. And even though it sounds really serious and it sounds that it will require a lot of knowledge, most of the time, like the internet provides us, all it will take from me is just to download SQL Ninja, for example. And SQL Ninja is a framework that it uses SQL injection attacks and vulnerable links through website in order to bypass, to use the SQL injection attack in order to take over the server. And if I've been able to take over the server, then it's extremely easy for me to start attacking other servers that are part of this infrastructure. And this is something really interesting because SQL injection is not just a threat about the information. It's a threat regarding your entire organization because you're unable to forecast where will a simple SQL injection attack or a simple SQL injection vulnerability will lead to. Most of the time you will never even know that someone have just got inside your network infrastructure. And how easy it is, I've just showed you how easy it is to run SQL injection attacks using Havish and to see the information stored inside this database. How easy it is for me to run command that will just, for example, will add a new user with a new password to the operating system inside of this Windows server. And this command is passing through the SQL injection attack. And this brings me what's called to the OS interaction. So I can expand my influence. I just added the username with a password to the Windows operating server running the SQL Server database. And all of that without any knowledge. I don't know which database runs at the backend. I don't know database commands. I don't know almost anything. But this simple application will provide me the option, and this is just an example. You can see many other applications that will provide you an OS interaction passing through SQL injection attack. So after getting this type of understanding, we have to start thinking about the result that SQL injection can lead to. Not only about getting the information and bypassing login page to get to the web application, but you can install a web shell, you can install any iframe injection, you can get, and the most scary part, you can start attacking additional servers and computers inside the network of the database. And from there, sky's the limit. So after starting trying to explain the SQL injection approach, what exactly we do in GreenSQL? In GreenSQL, we sit in front of your database server. It doesn't matter if it's a web application. It doesn't matter if it's a closed source application that connects to the database, but we sit between those. And because GreenSQL provides you a web-based, proxy-based application, you can install it on any part of your infrastructure. And this slide is really important in order for you to understand the threat level of your database. And we talked previously regarding the attackability surface. And when you start thinking about the attackability surface, you have to understand that talking with your database, it's not just a basic connection. This type of connection is based on 3 different layers, actually. And those 3 different layers, we are talking about the connection layer, which means there's an operating system using a TCP/IP connection to a different server, which means the web server knows on which specific IP address your database is available. And afterwards, there is a database application protocol layer, which means in Microsoft SQL, for example, this is the TDS layer. And only afterwards, there's the SQL grammar, the SQL commands that are being initiated. Any part of those layers provides a different type of threats. And in order to truly reduce the attackability surface of your database, all those 3 layers have to be handled. And all those 3 layers have to be mitigated in order for you to increase the security of your database server. So before we go a little bit deeper regarding the offering, many times customers ask us, listen, I have a web application firewall already installed. Do I even need a database security? So first of all, you need both, and I will explain how come. Any web application firewall, doesn't matter how sophisticated it is and how new it is, it still handles HTTP traffic. It still only detects the attacks and the threats running through the specific web server. Not only that your database can be connected, and probably is connected using a multiple and different types of sources, and not only through your web application, but any type of command that is based regarding database attack, your web application firewall cannot determine if this attack specifically goes through a specific location inside a database. The only way that a web application firewall can detect SQL injections is by a signature-based. So he will always look for the apostrophe commands, for any comment, for any union, for any 101, or any type of signature that it can detect. But the scary thing is that it will never understand the influence on your database because it sits in front of your web application. Database security solution, on the other hand, handles those three layers: the connection layer to the database application protocol, and the SQL commands itself. A database security solution doesn't care if it's a web server, if it's a closed source application, even if it's a printer that is trying to access your database. So I think that we have to understand the different layers required in order to truly mitigate SQL injection commands, and how exactly we do that in GreenSQL. You have to, first of all, enforce database firewall. And a database firewall is not just a basic firewall that you think of regarding a specific IP to a specific port and a specific IP and so on. A database firewall comes in order to define which specific queries are allowed to be executed from which specific source. And in GreenSQL, and you'll allow me just to show you when we're saying how easy it is, how truly easy it is to implement those type of rules. This is the GreenSQL management interface. This kind of a machine is now going through heavy load testing, so it might be a little slow. So I apologize for that. Let me just get a different machine. The appropriate password might help, no doubt. Okay. So as I mentioned before, the first thing that is extremely important in order to reduce the SQL injection threat and to truly prevent is a multiple layer security approach. Like anything in security, if someone will try to sell you a magic solution that you just press click and that's it, it's all fairy tales. It will require you to increase your security level by multiple layers of security. And when it comes to database security, you will have to enforce multiple layers. And when I just said a database firewall, just to give you an example, gentlemen, ladies and gentlemen, of course, you will need the option to set which is the source IP, which database user is used by your web server, if we're talking about most common SQL injection attacks, which application specifically is allowed to access, under which schedule if you only allow a specific schedule, to which table inside your database you're allowing a specific application to connect to. So it's also a question regarding where inside your database, if, for example, I have a specific application, where inside my, for example, human resource table, under the database, under, for example, employee information, which type of access I'm allowing the specific source to get to this specific table. Am I allowing my application only to view information, or am I allowing a specific source just to run administrative commands? And this brings us to the second part, which calls separation of duties. Many times it's also been referred as segregation of duties, which means you should know which duties are allowed to which source. Only your DBA team and your IT operational team should have the option to run administrative commands to your database. On the other hand, All of your application personnel and also all your web server should never have the option to run administrative commands. And this is really important for you in order to understand how you truly reduce the security threat from your database. Risk-based policies in order to understand which exact commands as part of the database are being allowed. To option to mask any sensitive information that is not allowed from a specific source. So in GreenSQL, as you just seen in the database firewall policies, you can extremely easily enforce masking rules by going to data masking. Choose the specific source you'd like to generate a command to on a specific database, for example. Choose the specific up to a column level resolution, and then enforce a specific masking behavior that you wish. As well as activity monitoring, which means you have to also run auditing solutions. An auditing solution is divided to two different solutions. The first one is administrative solution. If someone is running any type of administrative commands to your database, you should be alerted right away. Over email or over a syslog, it doesn't matter, but you have to be alerted right away if someone have just tried to execute administrative commands to your database. On the other hand, if you have sensitive locations inside your database, and again up to a column level, not only a table level, and I'll just demonstrate what I'm talking about. If under my AdventureWorks database, my human resource database, if someone have just tried to access any login ID information or any, for example, birthday, because I take birthday very seriously, if someone have tried to view, modify, or delete information in this specific columns, I would also like to be alerted right away. And this is how easy it is, and this is how easy it should be. In order for you to reduce security threats or SQL injection threats, you have to go through multiple layers of security when it comes to your database. Cloud. You will hear endless amount of option to migrate your infrastructure to the cloud. And cloud solutions, you can be using your own virtual private system over the cloud, or you'll be using a database as a service on the cloud. You have to understand it doesn't matter if you're talking about a cloud infrastructure or if we're talking about network infrastructure or even if you have your own private cloud. When it comes to database access, you have to take responsibility in order to reduce the threat level and the attackability surface of your database. It doesn't matter if you store it on the cloud or on premises. So I think before we'll go to Q&A, I would like just to sum up what we've just talked about. In order to truly reduce the threat level of SQL injection attacks, you have to take into consideration multiple layers that you have to enforce, from a database firewall layers, to separation of duties, to masking layers, to the option to learn all specific patterns that should be allowed from a specific source, or the option to enforce also additional auditing rules to see any administrative command or any access to sensitive information you stored inside your database, gentlemen. And I would like to thank you for your time, and now it's your option to ask any question you might have. I'll be more than happy to answer. You may write it down here, you may email us, you may contact us afterwards, and we'll be more than happy to answer any questions. No questions so far. Any questions you might want to share with me? I'll be more than happy to answer any questions. Okay, so what I just, I'm starting to receive a question. First of all, we have a session talking about MySQL security with PHP and not PHP, so you can check out our website and in our website you will see a link to YouTube that you can see the videos we had regarding hardening and also securing best practices for MySQL and PHP. Okay, so you can have it, you can see the video, and if you have additional questions regarding how the way to implement and how to use it, you can feel free and use it online. So specifically check it out please in our YouTube page, which is also youtube.com/GreenSQL. Regarding overhead and delay, so it's a very important question because the answer is not really simple. If we're talking about, it's really a matter depends on your query size, response size, number of connections, and number of transactions per second. So you have the option, and just to give you a point fingering regarding the overhead. The overhead can be between 0.5% up to 7 or even 10% when we're talking about huge amount of connection and transaction per second. And when I'm saying huge, it can be thousands and thousands. Okay. We have major customers that use our system in a 25,000 transactions per second and thousands of connections. So the overhead is acceptable by those customers. You can have it up and running in your infrastructure in order to try it out. Another question that I see that someone would like to apply rules for each user database table. Yes, sir. You have the option to do that, and not only in order to get this, but also as part of GreenSQL that I haven't shown you before. When it comes to database security rule, it's not just about running database firewall. It's also about the option to run what's called the risk-based policies. And when it comes to risk-based policy, if, gentlemen, you will check out the screen in front of you now, you have the option not only to run what's called a risk-based policy, but also this tiny checkbox of SQL injection detection is talking actually about 3 different mechanisms that detects SQL injection and also can prevent it, if you're interested, sir, at the database layer. Unlike a web application firewall that looks for signatures, this looks for specific behaviors when it comes to connecting to the database. So you have the option to just check this box in order to get all the information you're interested with this option. So it's not just a matter of a database firewall per table, but it's also about the option to detect SQL injection attacks and create what's called the risk-based. The IPS-IDS, it means an intrusion prevention system or only intrusion detection system. And you can have it according to the mode you'd like to enable this feature. I have another question regarding getting the presentation. Sure, sir. You can see not only the presentation, but the full video of this session will be uploaded to YouTube in a day or so, and everyone that just joined the session will get an email alert with a link to see this presentation again if they're interested. Someone that would like to get more about GreenSQL, sure, sir, we will contact you shortly. It will be our pleasure. Another question. Okay, so another question that I have about how can I move my SQL database on GreenSQL. So GreenSQL is an application that you can download from our website. And once you download GreenSQL, you configure it, and you configure what's called the proxy layer. The proxy layer means that the connection from your specific source application will go through GreenSQL. So when I would like to configure, I first of all configure where exactly is my MySQL database available, and you will see it right now. If I use MariaDB, if I use MySQL or Postgres, I just configure where is the real database, and afterwards I configure the proxy approach. And as part of the proxy approach, I'm configuring on which port specifically the GreenSQL system will listen on, and to where to the traffic will be forwarded. So I have my already configured instances that it can be MySQL or Microsoft SQL or MariaDB even, and then the communication will be forwarded. So you don't have to make any change as part of your database. The only thing that you have to do, sir, is to forward your connection string through GreenSQL, and then you can enforce that. I have another question. Does GreenSQL handle any type of database file level encryption? Yes, sir. Any file level encryption is running through inside the database. The connection from your application to the database is using most of the time, if you've enabled that, an SSL connection. GreenSQL support an SSL connection to the database, so any file level encryption inside the database is completely transparent to the connection layer to the database. So yes, it's supported and it should work fine. By the way, all of you, all of the participants here in this session, and we have a major amount of you, you are welcome to download GreenSQL from our website. And it's available for you to download and to evaluate any features that you like. Regarding GreenSQL costs, our sales representative will be more than happy to contact you shortly after this session, or you may contact us through our website and to get a price quote, and even to get it up and running in your system for evaluation within less than an hour. It's extremely easy to install and configure GreenSQL according to your own needs, sir. Any other questions? Yes, sir. You can download from my website at www.greensql.com, and you can go to download and you can have it up and running within minutes. And also part of our support team is able to provide you, yes, you will receive a trial for 14 days to actually evaluate all features from our website, sir. So in our website, greensql.com, you can download it right away. By the way, GreenSQL runs on any Windows Server operating system or any Linux level operating system. Any other questions, gentlemen? Okay. So I would like to thank each and every one of you for joining us to this webinar, and please join us next month for another webinar on a different solution. So feel free to contact us with any question you might have about database security in general or anything about GreenSQL. Thank you again, and have a great day.